KBOO Community Radio. How many of you have heard Thom Hartmann on KBOO? Great. I bet you're glad about that. I know we are. We're glad because Thom Hartmann offered the show for free and has been extremely generous. If you're not aware of KBOO, it's one of the oldest community radio stations in the country. It began in 1968. This is our 45th birthday year. 45 years of KBOO. And we are playing the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm sure a lot of you are aware that it was carried on the Clear Channel station. Clear Channel last year decided to suddenly pull the plug and cut off progressive programming in the Portland area. And immediately switched to an all-sports format. And Mitt Romney is a part of that as well. An interesting thing, in Portland, we consider ourselves pretty progressive. Only 6 companies own the majority of the media in Portland. So even here, we see this massive consolidation and its effects. We see how quickly one of these corporations can just decide to pull the plug, and there goes progressive radio. So community radio, I think, is a great alternative. We are free, open to the public. We're commercial free. We have absolutely no government funding. We have no corporate funding. We have only a few underwriters, local, and we have those companies have to meet certain criteria of our values. And 6,000 of you are our members, and that's what keeps us independent. So it's a great model, and it's been going strong for 45 years. Thank you all for supporting KBOO, and thank you for supporting Thom Hartmann. We have it on right now as a trial basis until the end of December, so definitely let us know what you think about this program, and it's on at 4 o'clock, 90.7 FM every weekday. So that's where Thom Hartmann is on the dial right now in the Portland area. We're going to hear from him about the crash of 2016. This is his new book about right now the situation that this country is in, where we have a social stratification of wealth that is, I would say, unprecedented. And just as one example, you know, the 6 Walton family heirs to the Walmart legacy own the same amount of wealth as 43% of Americans. So this is the situation that we're in. We're going to hear about how we got here, what's coming, and how we can prevent it. So, Thom Hartmann.
It's so nice to be home, to be back. As many of you know, our 3 kids all still live here in Portland, and at least one of them is. I don't think they want to be called out, but there's our daughter, our Kendra Wave. She just got her license as a nurse practitioner. Now she's back with her PhD. And Justin's there. Anyway, so with our 3 kids here, odds are pretty high that we're going to end up back here. But anyway. I want to thank Powell's especially for putting this thing on. Powell's has always been a good friend of ours. KBOO has had our show on, and we are so grateful for that. And thank you to KBOO, and please support community radio. It's local programming. I realize I'm not local programming. And a lot of community stations carry some national programming. Typically it's me and Amy Goodman. But local programming is really important stuff. And over the years I've had radio stations come and say, we're going to take an hour of your show off, or we're going to even take your show off because we're going to do local programming. And I've always said, that's fine. I think that's a good thing. Local programming is really important. And although I love being on the show, but around the station. But the point is that this is a real gem. This KBOO is a real gem, and for years and years and years I've been doing fundraising. I mean, back before I was doing radio, when I was just the author of the Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight in 1996, I was doing fundraisers for KBOO, and I continue to support that. But sorry, I got to talk louder. Okay, eat the mic. That's the advice I always give my guests, right? Eat the mic. Also, I want to shout out to Miriam and the folks at Radcast. I don't know where you are. Are you here? There you go, right there. The people who are every day now. We are in our news cast. Radcast is tracking nationwide this cloud that's coming from Fukushima and keeping us up to date on what's going on. Not just Fukushima, but the radiation. So, thank you so much for all of that. So, to start at the beginning, I opened the book, this book, The Crash of 2016. With a story that I remember from back when I was 8 or 9 years old. My dad used to subscribe to Amazing Stories. It was a science fiction magazine that John Campbell edited, and it published authors like Poul Anderson and Robert Silverberg and Jack Vance and some of the real greats. And I remember the story. I couldn't find the story. It's hard to find those old, 58 copies, even on eBay, and I wasn't sure which year it was. So I tell the story from memory. But in this story that I used to open this book, at that time in 1958-59, nobody had ever seen the backside of the moon. Nobody had ever circled the moon. Nobody knew it was back there. I mean, might there be a crashed spaceship back there? Might there be a city from some ancient civilization from another planet? Might there be, volcanoes? Might there be jungles and dinosaurs? I mean, who knows? It's the backside of the moon. Humans have never ever seen it. And so they sent this space capsule up to go see the backside of the moon. And as they're going around, they've got all the way up to the front side of the moon, they're going around the side of the moon, and this is back in the days of vacuum tubes, so they radio down to Houston and they say, we're going to turn off the power, turn off the tubes and save our batteries, because we're going to lose our signal when we hit the moon anyway, or when the moon's between us and the Earth, and we'll catch up with you on the other side of the moon. And so they turn off all the radios, go to radio silence, and as they're around the backside of the moon, they're looking out the window just as they get around the backside of the moon, and there's this long moment of, oh my God. And then this virtual fight breaks out in the cockpit about, should we tell them? Should we tell them? Can they handle this? Will they believe us? Will they lock us up when we get back? I mean, should we tell them? And in my recollection, they ultimately decided not to tell us. But what had so horrified them as they went around the backside of the moon was that they saw that the backside of the moon was all like those old roller coasters, that are held up with 2x4s, the scaffolds. It was all 2x4s, and the front of the moon was canvas, and the 2x4s were holding the canvas up. It was just, the front of the moon was just this canvas facade, and stretched out on 2x4s, and the back was hollow. I tell that story because it's the perfect metaphor for our economy. It's like, our economy looks like it's doing great. Stock market just hit 16,000. For the top 1%, fat city. But for the rest of the people, for the rest of us, it ain't so good. It's not. It's definitely not so good. And so the question becomes, and the two big questions that I want to answer tonight, and we get into a whole lot of other stuff in the book, but actually my 4 goals for tonight are to answer why that happened, how that happened, and the why is a real surprise, by the way. The how that happened, you're probably more familiar with, although I'll fill in some of the holes. Why I'm suggesting that 2016 we're going to see something very much like 2008, only probably worse. And finally, what we can do either to prevent it, which I'm frankly skeptical about, or what kind of an extraordinary opportunity it'll present to us, just like it did to Franklin Roosevelt in the crash of '29, just like it did to Abraham Lincoln in the crash of 1857, just as it did to Thomas Jefferson in the crash of 1700, just as it did to Teddy Roosevelt in the crash of 1897, that these, well, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, but I think I just kind of gave away that one. Anyhow, to start out, what happened? What happened was that from the time of the George Washington administration until the time of the Ronald Reagan administration, as people became more productive, as they made stuff more efficiently, they produced wealth. I mean, Adam Smith, 1776, The Wealth of Nations. The whole premise of wealth is different from the premise of money. Money is not wealth. Wealth is things of value. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations And frankly, if you're into reading Adam Smith, his more important book is The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which warns us about run-amok capitalism. But in any case, in The Wealth of Nations, which was his kind of intro 101 to capitalism, he said, a stick laying on the ground, a tree limb laying on the ground has no intrinsic value to society. I mean, it may have value to the forest, but not to society. So you wouldn't call it wealth. But if you apply human labor to it and carve it into an axe handle, then it has wealth that you can pass from generation to generation. It has both value and wealth. It becomes part of the wealth of the nation. So the wealth of a nation, literally the title of his book, The Wealth of Nations, the wealth of nations is the consequence of what they make, what they produce. What they produce is measured, it's called productivity. And as productivity increases over time, traditionally wages increase along with it, because productivity is a measurement of the unit of stuff that can be produced per unit of labor. So if an hour of labor, if it took an hour of labor 100 years ago or 200 years ago to gather 10 bushels of wheat, and then 100 years ago that same hour of labor could gather 100 bushels of wheat, and now that same hour of labor can produce 1,000 bushels of wheat, then you can see, as a consequence of a whole variety of things like mechanization and whatnot, productivity has gone up. And along with the productivity going up, typically wages have gone up. The two have always followed. In fact, there's a graph on either page 77 or 79 of the book. Those of you who have the book, you can see it starts in 1947, but you can track it all the way back literally to 1787. That as productivity went up, wages went up. And not only did wages go up, but standard of living went up. The average income in the United States in 1900, in the census of 1900, in today's dollars was $5,000 a year. People were basically poor. I mean, it wasn't terrible poor. It wasn't grinding poverty the way it was in many parts of the world, because $5,000 could actually, there was a lot of independence and people had farms and there was a lot of land and things, but $5,000, it's a lot of money. And the average work week was around 70 hours. So as time went on, wages went up and the work week went down, which is like this extraordinary thing. So I remember 1966, and we actually tracked this one down because I was pretty sure about the year. And on eBay, I couldn't find collections of Amazing magazines, at least at a price I could afford, but I could find collections of Time magazine from the 60s. And so I bought a couple. I bought 65, 66, 67 Time magazine. I was pretty sure it was in there. And Sam, who helped with this book, Sam Sachs, who helped edit this book, and even frankly wrote some parts of it, did a lot of work on it, an enormous amount of work on it. Sam went through 3 years worth of Time magazines and finally found this thing. Now can I borrow your book? Just one. So Time magazine did the math on this, and they said, if productivity continues to increase from 1966 to the year 2000, I mean, the question was, what's life going to be like in 2000? Right? The Jetsons, right? Yeah. What's life going to be like in 2000? And so they just did the simple math. And they said if productivity continues to rise at the rate it has for the last 200 and so many years, and wages continue to follow that productivity, then the consequences, fairly predictable. And I will, to quote Time magazine, 1966, by 2000, the machines will be producing so much that everyone in the US will, in effect, be independently wealthy. With government benefits, even non-working families will have, by one estimate, an annual income of $30,000 to $40,000. How to use leisure meaningfully may become our major national problem. And by the way, $30,000, $40,000 in thank you so much, in 1966 dollars is $196,000 to $230,000 in today's dollars. And the fact of the matter is that if productivity did continue to increase, if wages had tracked productivity, we would actually be there. I mean, if you do the math, that's where we would be. The middle class would be strong and healthy, and would be the upper middle class, because the middle class of 1966, when you went from the 1940s, when they, if they compare, the middle class of 1940s would look at the middle class of 1966 and say, these people are rich. And the middle class of 1920s would look at the people in the 1940s and say, those people are rich. And the people in 1900 would look at the 1920s and say, those people are rich. And so these were not crazy numbers. So what happened? Where did all that money go? Well, what happened was a whole variety of things that all came together as the consequence of a philosophy and a series of actions. And basically what happened was that labor flattened out. Now you will hear, and this is one of the most dishonest things that I hear in the media constantly, in the corporate media when they're talking about household income, is they'll say, you know, household income back in the 1960s was $25,000 a year. Household income now is $41,000 a year. Looks like things are getting better. Well, yeah, if we're talking about households. But if you look at individual income was around $25,000 a year in '66, and it's still around $25,000 a year. In fact, it's down about $700-800. So what accounts for that difference? What happened? We're in that gap. There's two pieces to that gap. A, where'd the money go? And B, what happened to the people who weren't getting the money? Let's start out with the people who weren't getting the money, which is the working class, the 99% of Americans. The first thing that they did in the 70s and the 80s was mom went to work. Used to be a single wage earner household. Yeah. This was the quote American dream. This is the world my dad lived in. He worked in a tool and die shop for 40 years. And mom stayed home with me and my three brothers, and this is not to say, you know, those gender roles have to be that way, but it was one person was able to maintain a household, basically, or two people working part-time could maintain a household and be there for their kids and have leisure time. And my dad had, you know, took a couple of weeks vacation every year, and by the time he died in 2006, his house had been long ago paid off, and when he came back from World War II, he went to college for free on the GI Bill, and you know, and my wife's father actually got all the way to his JD, his lawyer degree, and became the Assistant Attorney General of the state of Michigan, first member of his family ever to go to college, and all because college was free. And in my dad's case, it was because the union was there. I mean, he worked in Lansing Tool and Die Sinking. He worked as a machinist, or in a machine shop. He actually ran the business end of the shop, did the bookkeeping and things, although he knew how to run most of the machines and he'd fill in for people. But he worked in this tool and die shop for 40 years, and the machinist union contract that he helped negotiate every year gave him that good wage that every 3 years he could buy a new car, every year he could take a vacation, he could raise 4 boys, and you know, not only did he have a pension when he retired, but when he died, it rolled over to my mom, and both of them had health care until the day they died, as a consequence of that 40 years he put in as in a tool and die shop. That was the American dream. That was always the American dream. Alexis de Tocqueville in 1836 in his book, Democracy in America. Thank you. It's been a long week. Alexis de Tocqueville talked about the American dream as basically being able to be self-reliant, not in the libertarian weird notion of I don't need anybody, but the community together helping individuals to achieve what they needed in life, so that they could have a decent and comfortable life and leisure time and an opportunity for education, and the children's generation would be better than theirs. So first, mom went to work. Well, that wasn't enough, and by the end of the 80s, early 90s, mom going to work, still was not. I mean, first of all, mom was only making 70% of what dad made, if that, and secondly, expenses were still going up, and wages were not. So then people got into credit cards. Now, let me flash back a little bit to the 1970s. In 1976, as I recall, a friend of mine, Terry O'Connor, who just passed away a few weeks ago, and Terry, I hope you're doing well, I know you are. Terry and I had this business in Lansing, and we were doing really well with this little herbal tea business and making a fair amount of money. And that year, 76, I made more money than my dad had ever made. And my dad was real proud of me for that, and so was I. But what was interesting about that was 1976, I was 25 years old, and I finally qualified for an American Express card. I never had a credit card before then, right? Those of you old enough to remember 1976, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And not only did I, boy, is this a stat. In fact, I still have an American Express card as a member since '76, right? Not only was that the status symbol, but the flip side of it was, if you didn't pay it off 100% by the end of the month, they pulled that sucker and you had to wait a year to apply for a new one. Wow. And good luck on that even. Well, they changed the rules in the 90s and said, well, you know, let's pass out credit cards to anybody who wants one. You know, my cat used to get them. I used to remember Higgins, who's been